Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live for this Tuesday. I'm Marcus Grant, along with Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. And big news, because today is National Homemade Bread Day, which is exciting news for the sourdough starter in the back of my fridge. But it did lead me to wonder, Cynthia, what is your favorite type of bread?
Easy one. I really like those Hawaiian rolls. You know what I'm talking about. They're the best bread possible. If you're ever, you can eat them with butter. You can eat them as a sandwich. Hawaiian rolls every day of the week.
Well, I'm a grandma, so I like cinnamon raisin bread because I'm a grandma.
Well, I got to say that Rosie McGee, in addition to all the treats that she makes, dominates with garlic bread. Cynthia, if you think that her Thanksgiving spread of treats is amazing, I'll have her bring some garlic bread over the next couple of weeks, too.
Do you need my address? Because I accept packages.
Totally down with all of those, although I will say a nice pumpernickel, maybe a little bit underrated, especially if you're making a nice Black Forest ham sandwich. All right. Anyway, before we fill up too much on bread, let's order up some waiver wire appetizers, shall we? Adam Rank, who should be on the menu from fantasy free agency this week?
I really believe in Savon Ahmed, a player that I really liked when he was up at Washington, ironically, or not coincidentally, with Myles Gaskin. But he's really getting an opportunity with the Miami Dolphins, and I don't think that this is something that you should ignore. I know that Matt Breida is dealing with a hamstring injury, but when Gaskin was playing, they gave him all the snaps. They gave him all the carries. They're going to do the same thing with Ahmed. So if he is available in your waiver wire, and I've got to assume that he is, this should be your top priority.
You know who I'm looking at? I'm looking at Nyheim Hines, who's at Green Bay this week. Obviously, the Green Bay matchup is great, but also Hines, who's available in 64% of NFL.com leagues. That's kind of crazy, by the way. I was surprised to see he was available in so many leagues. But my favorite little gymnast, he is going to be a great opportunity to really exceed expectations this week because the opportunity to run the ball against the Packers is a well-known fact. So why he's even available on any sort of waiver wire is really beyond me. Go get him before your opponents do.
And he seems to have a definite role in that offense, unlike the other two running backs. Speaking of a definite role, Damian Harris looks like he's carving one out there in New England, averaging nearly 15 touches per game and picking up nearly 6 yards per touch, also among the league leaders in rush yards over expectation, which basically is saying he is running even better than what's being blocked for him. And he gets to face the Houston Texans this week, who has the worst run defense in the National Football League. And at this point, he might be making Sony Michel obsolete in the Patriots backfield.
All right, I'm going to stick with this running back theme and talk about J.D. McKissic, who somehow is still available in 59% of NFL.com leagues, which is crazy. So as I speak, please go to the waiver wire and pick this guy up because the change at quarterback has been good for J.D. McKissic, who has brought in 17-plus fantasy points in 2 straight games, as well as 33 targets from Alex Smith, which is the most on the Washington football team. So it goes and shows that his usage goes far beyond just the run game. He's also involved in the passing game. I know Antonio Gibson is there as well, but both of these guys have been very good. So go pick up J.D. McKissic.
So basically what we're trying to tell you is that fantasy running backs matter. Now that we've kind of figured out who some of the top picks will be this week, let's go around the horn, Adam Rank, and talk about who are our top 3 waiver wire picks in order.
Well, listen, I like all the running backs who are discussed right here, but Ahmed, if you'll notice, he's the only one that we're talking about who's not battling for carries with other players, because Damian Harris has got a guy with Rex Burkhead, Antonio Gibson, and J.D. McKissic. Ahmed's got the gig all by himself, and he has got a great young quarterback, too, with an offense that is going to trust him. So that would be my top spot. The rest of it, you can just fill in the blanks.
Okay, you did make a good argument, but I'm going to stick with Cynthia's guy, Nyheim Hines. Now, he is truly the lead back in that Colts backfield. Then I'm going to rock with the guy I hyped up, J.D. McKissic, and do MVS as number 3.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Nyheim Hines as well. My number 2, Michael Pittman Jr., because everybody needs a wide receiver now and again. And then number 3, if you need a deeper option, Kalen Ballage, who seems to be the lead back and has a great opportunity against the Jets.
I feel like we are always thirsty for running backs, which is why I'm going Nyheim Hines at number 1. Damian Harris would be my number 2 pick in New England, and we'll round it out with J.D. McKissic, who's been doing some work in Washington in the backfield along with Antonio Gibson. All right. So, in honor of all these weird national days we have, today is also National Unfriending Day. And I feel like it's always a good idea to go through and sort of clean up your social media followers or your fantasy roster as well. So let's take a look. And Adam Rank, who is someone that folks should be unfriending this week in fantasy?
Well, I'm going to go with AJ Green, because if you're still my Facebook friend after the last couple of months, then you've really meant something to me over the years. But when I look at the production for AJ Green, he's really now starting to take I don't think that he's a mentor, because I think he can still go. It's kind of like when Ric Flair was in Evolution. Like, he could still go, but you knew that Batista and Randy Orton were going to be the guys who were going to step up. By the way, Cynthia wrote that for me. But so unfortunately, AJ Green, I appreciate all that you've done for me over the years, but I'm going to have to let you go this week.
Well, I'm looking down here, and on my MySpace, I'm going to take Leonard Fournette versus Ramza. And Adam Rank actually wrote that one for me. He is number 42 running back this season. He had only 5 points versus Carolina in Week 10. That's his fewest since Week 3. I'm not sure the Jags were too fond of him. I'm not sure the Bucks are too fond of him. It looks like it's Rojo's. If you hear everything the coaches are saying and everything the coaches are doing, it is Rojo's to lose. So I'm see you later, Leonard Fournette. Get out of my 8 or whatever it was on MySpace.
As I'm going through my AOL email list, I think J.K. Dobbins is probably not going to survive it. I mean, look, with Mark Ingram back, things just get a lot murkier in that Ravens backfield. Without Mark Ingram, he had a 62% snap share. With Mark Ingram, he's never reached 50% snaps, had double-digit touches just once, and never more than 61 scrimmage yards in a game. The Ravens like using all 3 of those guys back there, which means for fantasy, pretty much none of them are usable.
All right, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I wasn't old enough to have a MySpace or an AOL, so I just have to unfriend Melvin Gordon and unfollow him from Instagram. I know this is a little bit of a spicy take, but Gordon's 2 lowest touches this season have come in the last 2 weeks, which makes sense since he's had fewer than 5 fantasy points in 2 straight games and fewer than 50 rushing yards in 3 straight games. Since Week 6, he's been able to bring home more than 12 fantasy points, and that's just not enough to keep me alive during this fantasy playoff push, and I don't want to scroll on Instagram and see him anymore, so you have been unfollowed.
Oh, Kimmy, you will never know the pain of spending 2 hours to download a 5-minute video on the interwebs. Even in a time of social distancing and added health precautions, Overreaction Theater is still open, so we can get together there. Let's make some hilariously wild assumptions about fantasy players based on their past 4 quarters of work. And Kimmy, we will start with you. You can start all of the Buccaneers wide receivers from here on out.
No, this is why we call it Overreaction Theater. Now, all 3 Buccaneer wideouts did get a piece of the offense in Week 10, with Mike Evans leading the pack with almost 20 fantasy points, Godwin coming in second with 15, and Antonio Brown getting 13 fantasy points. And although 3 did have uses, I don't know if I'd be comfortable pressing go on all 3 of those guys every single week. Now, beyond just these guys, Brady also has Gronk. He has Cameron Brate. Plus, he has his running backs, including Leonard Fournette, who we just mentioned. Those are way too many mouths to feed for me. So if anything, I expect Chris Godwin to be a consistent contributor from here on out, with a few big ceiling potential games for the others. But I don't think I'd press go on all 3 just yet.
It's basically 2 weeks in. We still haven't learned much about this group. Okay, Cynthia, MVS is now a fantasy wide receiver 2 every week, even with Devontae Adams on the field.
This is an overreaction for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, they're playing Indianapolis on Sunday. And reason number 2, of course, we saw Allen Lazard be activated from IR. He's nearing a return. This could be more mouths to feed, and Devontae Adams will be the number 1. There's no doubt about that. You're never going to consider not playing him. But MVS, he's definitely worth picking up, but probably going to live on your bench, at least in a matchup-by-matchup basis.
All right, Rank, you are flouting my advice on Damian Harris and saying that Rex Burkhead is the must-start running back of the Patriots backfield.
What do you say? You're the one who just said that, not me. I don't believe this at all. You're the one who's overreacting to your own advice. You just gave 20 minutes ago, or 20, whatever, 10, whatever it was. Here's my thing. Rex Burkhead, like Damian Harris is the guy that we want to invite over to the house, but you know that he's bringing Rex with him, and he's the guy who doesn't bring any beers, but you know what? First thing he does is walk over to the cooler and start stealing all, and the good stuff too. He's not taking the domestic draft loggers. he's taking the micro bruise, and it's irritating me because Damian Harris is the running back that you want to start for this team because he's getting the consistent touches. But Rex Burkhead does enough, gets into the end zone enough just to be annoying. Not so much that we can start him, but just to be annoying. Now, let me tell you this, Marcus. This is what I want you to listen. Wayne Gallman is going to make us forget about, oh gosh, what was that guy's name? Oh, Saquon Barkley. See, I forgot already. So what do you say?
Whoa.
I forgot his name already.
Whoa. Look, I get it. Wayne Gallman's dominated the backfield snaps, especially since Devontae Freeman went down with an injury. I mean, look, 16 and a half touches are nice. 5 touchdowns in 4 games. That's very nice. The problem is the yardage has been sort of underwhelming. And on top of it, the schedule gets a lot tougher for him after week 12. So I still think when we get to next year, we'll still be talking about Saquon Barkley as a top 3 fantasy pick in most leagues. So, all right. You know, it's easy to sit here and talk about all the good stuff, but sometimes we just have to have some very real heart-to-heart conversations. And Kimmy, I think it's just time to admit that Derrick Henry's regression time has now come. It is upon us.
Okay, now this one may have some validity to it, but I'm not saying you bench him. Let me make that very, very clear. He's still the fantasy running back number 6 on the season, even though there has been a drop-off since week 9. He hasn't scored a touchdown in the last 2 games, whereas he scored 8 touchdowns in the previous 5 games combined. Only having 20-plus fantasy points in 2 of 9 games this season, he's not putting up the same fantasy numbers we were used to last season, but he's still a must-start every single week.
Cynthia, Michael Thomas used to be a must-start every single week, but at this point, we just might as well believe he's not going to see the end zone this season.
No, never. He's never going to see the end zone. It's over. It's never going to happen. Just kidding. None of that is true. Michael Thomas was hurt. Obviously, Drew Brees' injury is a problem. However, Michael Thomas is going to see the end zone. It's going to happen. It's going to be okay. I know I rode really hard for Michael Thomas ahead of the season, and he hasn't performed, but largely that's because he hasn't been on the field. So this is Atlanta. This is Atlanta week. Do you understand what happens in Atlanta week? This is get right, get in the end zone. Let's go. Michael Thomas, I don't care who's throwing the ball to him. He's getting in the end zone this weekend.
All right, Rank. Jared Goff, he's never, ever going to throw a touchdown pass ever again.
Yeah, that's accurate. I think that's an underreaction. This is you know what? If in all honesty, is there any way we can just put Herbert on the Rams and give Goff to the Chargers? Like our lives would be so much easier. It'd be so much nicer. But it is disappointing, and it's disappointing because we look at Jared Goff as a streamable quarterback, and when he has the absolute best matchup you can have, he does nothing with it. And listen, this is me coming into the season. I thought Goff was going to throw a lot of touchdowns because Todd Gurley scored a bunch of touchdowns last year. Obviously, he's in Atlanta right now, but they found Malcolm Brown to just be his replacement, and it's been no big deal. So unfortunately, Jared Goff, that was a wild swing and miss for me. So for that, I apologize. And I might need to apologize for this, but James Conner is an RB2 on his own team. Marcus?
I mean, watching from the last couple of weeks, maybe? Look, he's had 26 touches over the last couple of weeks. That's just sort of meh. And when he's had the ball, he's been wildly inefficient, just 2.6 yards per carry against a couple of very running back friendly defenses. But okay, let's not say he's the RB2. He's actually still dominating the snaps. 85% of the running back snaps he's played in the past 2 weeks. Mike Tomlin says they don't plan to make any changes at running back. So hopefully he has a bounce back game coming against the Jaguars this week, and we can put all of this ugliness behind us from what we've seen recently for James Conner. So there we go. Monday Night Football, and file this under be careful what you wish for. It's time to look back at some of the top fantasy performances from last night's Vikings-Bears game. But first, our resident Bears fan, Adam Rank, had some, he basically sort of jinxed himself, I guess, in the efforts to try and help his own squad. He played the old reverse jinx card, and take a listen to what happened.
Thielen's going to go out and have 50 fantasy points. And I think that if you ranked him in the top 5, we could reverse jinx him because I need the Bears to win this week. I think this is a selfish, more than my fantasy team. I need a jinx on the Vikings if possible, because I think that Kirk Cousins legitimately doesn't like me and wants to spite me.
All right, well, he didn't get 50 fantasy points, right? But he did have 2 touchdowns, so what have you to say about that?
That I was right. I told you what was going to happen, or Matt Nagy did on Monday. I know, like, it's weird. I come out and I I get this spot on. You think I'm, there's this guy who comes in and makes these weird analogies and starts comparing, Kirk Cousins to Portillo's fries or whatever. But listen, I was spot on because I knew the Bears were going to try to shut down Dalvin Cook, which they did, and they were going to try to take advantage of Adam Thielen. And what they did is they got him on Buster screen a lot. They weren't throwing against him against Jalen Johnson or Kyle Fuller, but they did get a way to separate them, and that's kind of an exploitable position for them. So Adam Thielen's an elite talent, and this is why you start him each and every week, and why Florio was wrong and should have had him in the top 5.
All right, Kimmy, maybe something that's a little less bitter. Dalvin Cook ended up with a pretty decent day. Maybe not great, but okay.
Okay, come on. Do not besmirch him. I understand it's not another 40-plus fantasy point performance, but he still put up a solid 15-point performance against a very tough Bears defense. He rushed 30 times for nearly 100 yards, also catching all 4 targets on Monday Night Football. Now, this was his first game without a touchdown and his fewest rushing total since Week 5, which just goes to show how incredible Dalvin Cook has been in fantasy this season if we're sad about 96 yards and 15 fantasy points.
Well, another guy who didn't have a touchdown but definitely earned his Portillo's hot dog, fries, and milkshake would be Justin Jefferson. 8 receptions on 10 targets, a measly 135 yards. It's like he took the L, got the Portillo's, went to River North, went by my old stomping grounds at Kellogg, and then came all the way back and had an awesome game. He's a huge difference maker. He should be in contention for one of the best receivers in the entire league, not just the best rookie receiver.
Some of the tougher matchups that some of our guys are facing in Week 11. So ranked first up, the guy we just saw there, Tom Brady. He's the QB1 from last week. And against the Rams, who were giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, just 7 points. So sweat or no sweat for TB12?
Are we not going to celebrate the graphics department or the animation? That was really good. Like I listen, and I don't mean this as actually thing, but we do a lot of great stuff on that show. That was exceptional. I will say, though, that I'm worried about Tom Brady in this matchup against the Rams. We've seen him struggle against good teams. The Rams have allowed one top 15 fantasy quarterback in the last 6 games. We saw what they did to Russell Wilson. This is a tough matchup. You got Jalen Ramsey, who will likely shadow Antonio Brown. I don't like this at all. I think that if you've had Tom Brady, you've been streaming him with another quarterback. Unfortunately for me, it's him and Jared Goff, so I'm going to have to hit the waiver wire, but I'm definitely sweating this one.
Yeah, last week a huge game. It just doesn't seem like it's going to happen again against the Rams. All right, Kimmy, we know you're starting Alvin Kamara, but he's facing a Falcons team that surprisingly has given up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. So maybe we pump the brakes in a daily setting. Sweat or no sweat for AK?
No, there's absolutely no sweat on this one. Alvin Kamara is in the running for fantasy MVP, having 15-plus fantasy points in every single game this season, including 3 games with over 30 fantasy points. Devontae Adams is the only other player in the league with more 30-plus fantasy point performances. But a part of Alvin Kamara's upside this season has come from his involvement in the passing game, averaging 7 receptions a game this season. He's one of the safest players in the league, and you should never be stressed or sweating any bit about Alvin Kamara.
Hey, Cynthia, we keep the running back theme going with Miles Sanders at Cleveland, where the Browns are giving up the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last month. So sweat or no sweat here?
I am not sweating this for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, did you watch that Giants game? If they would have just handed the ball off to Miles Sanders and had him rush to the outside, the score would have been completely flipped the other direction. And I think they know that as well. Miles Sanders back from injury against the Browns. You know there's that guy Myles Garrett. You know what the best way to stay away from Myles Garrett is if you're Carson Wentz? Hand the ball to Miles Sanders. I am not worried about him at all this week.
Finally, I'll go with A.J. Brown against the Ravens, who are giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. I'm going to say this is no sweat. Now, 2 weeks ago, A.J. Brown had a huge game when I thought maybe he couldn't. Last week, he was less than exciting, but I think this week he sort of bounces back. Part of it is he gets more targets. He's had 7 or more in every game before last week. And it's going to be a really fun matchup just from a football standpoint when you've got Brown against those Ravens corners there. So I do think, though, that the Titans are going to try to feed him as much as possible. If he can get some yards after the catch like that, I think he'll end up having a pretty good number.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It's time for my 5. And with Josh Allen on a bye this week, or if you're like me and you've just been playing the matchups on a week-to-week basis at the quarterback position, I have my 5 favorite streamable quarterbacks for Week 11. Let's kick it off at number 5. It's Jameis Winston versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Jameis is presumably getting the call to start, with Drew Brees dealing with rib injuries sustained back in Week 10. Back when Jameis started for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he averaged 17 fantasy points per game over his career, and he actually led the league last season in passing, 319 passing yards per game to be precise. Now, if there was any week to stream Jameis, it would be this one, because the matchup is so good against the Atlanta Falcons. No one has allowed more than 300-yard games to quarterbacks than the Falcons, who have had 1 in 7 of their 9 games this season. Number 4, it's Baker Mayfield versus the Eagles. Mossy, this one's for you. I know you're a Homer Browns fan. Baker has been throwing the ball in the end zone consistently this season, having 2+ passing touchdowns in 5 of the last 8 games. Much like Jameis's favorable matchup, Baker is going against a defense in the Eagles that have allowed a top 12 quarterback in 4 of the last 5 games, as well as 20+ fantasy points to quarterbacks in the last 6 of 9. Number 3, Alex Smith versus the Bengals, comeback king of the league. He's coming off a career-high game with nearly 400 passing yards versus the Lions. Smith has had back-to-back games with 325+ yards and looks to do it again for a 3rd time's a charge moment versus Cincy, who have allowed a top 7 fantasy quarterback in 3 of the last 4 games. Number 2, it's been Big Ben at the Jaguars. He's been consistently good, having 25+ fantasy points and a top 7 fantasy quarterback finish in back-to-back weeks. The only quarterback left with an undefeated team, Roethlisberger, has thrown 2+ touchdowns in 8 games this season. That's tied for most in the league. Now, only being rostered in less than 61% of NFL.com leagues, Big Ben is an easy add. All right, Vince, drum roll me, please. I want the suspense here. Drum roll. Number 1, Tua Tagovailoa at the Denver Broncos. Tua time is here, and I'm fully bought into the rookie quarterback as a fantasy stud. He had another mistake-free game in Week 10, bringing in his 2nd consecutive double-digit fantasy performance, completing 15 of 25 passes for 169 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. This week, Tua takes on the Broncos, who are allowing almost 20 fantasy points a game to quarterbacks. So get the young bull in your starting lineup, and you can thank me later for that one. All right, guys, those are my 5 streamable quarterbacks for Week 11.
Swift splits out to the right side. Back to pass. Matthew steps and throws. Caught. First down. Inside the 10. To the 5. Swift fighting his way in. Touchdown, Detroit Lions. How about DeAndre Swift, 5'9", 215. He just lowered his helmet, put the boom on, and found the house.
Rookie in the Motor City helps us start up another edition of Higher or Lower. Cynthia Freeland here with our weekly home version of everybody's favorite game. So I will set a stat line. Cynthia will tell us whether she thinks that player will go higher or lower in Week 11. So we will start with the aforementioned DeAndre Swift at Carolina, a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games. The Panthers allowing the 4th most touchdowns to running backs, so higher or lower than 1 end zone trip for DeAndre Swift.
Show me that star. That means exactly 1. Oh, that's a great star. Very good work, control room. I love it. Look, DeAndre Swift is the starter. He was announced the starter before last game. He showed out. It wasn't a great opportunity necessarily against that defense. And now he's again the starter with a much better opportunity. Carolina has allowed a top 25 running back in every single game this season. Now, if only the Lions could play some defense, then maybe they could win some more games. Oh, wait, that's not what we're talking about here. DeAndre Swift, 1 touchdown. Show me the star. It's happening. That's the number.
All right, we'll go to Derrick Henry against the Baltimore Ravens. He's averaging more than 105 yards per game. The Ravens have only allowed a running back to get over 80 yards twice this season. So we'll put it at 89 rushing yards for D. Henry. Higher or lower?
I have a higher here. I'm sorry, I'm lying to you. I have a lower here, 81 rush yards. It is very close. 81 rush yards, a touchdown, 1 reception, 11 yards. That's where that number got messed up in my mind because of that reception. The thing about Derrick Henry is they need to change the timing up. They need to have motion. They need to use different things to trick the defenses. They got a little stale in the last game, and we saw what happened. So I think Arthur Smith goes back to the drawing board. He goes back to his guy. He runs exactly where they're vulnerable, and Baltimore will have to deal with a lot more Derrick Henry, and I think this is the one where Derrick Henry's impact will be felt, but it won't be more than 89 rushing yards.
All right, so an average day for El Tractorcito. All right, let's look at some quarterbacks. First up, Aaron Rodgers against the Colts. He has at least 2 touchdown passes or more in 4 straight games, but Indy is allowing the 3rd fewest touchdowns to quarterbacks, just 1.2 per game, so higher or lower than 2 touchdown throws for A-Rod.
May I please have a ding and the higher number, please? Oh, that means more. I have 3 touchdowns for Rodgers projected and 281 passing yards. The difference here, why does it matter? Well, the way that they use all of their different pieces. This doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be like a jet sweep that is sort of a run that goes to a pass. That still counts as a touchdown pass, ladies and gentlemen. So here, those 3 passes, they may not be those deep shots that you're looking at. Well, at least one of them will be, but they may not be those, but they're going to count as passes.
So we go from the veteran to the rookie, and Justin Herbert against the New York Jets. Herbert throwing for more than 291 yards per game. The Jets allowing the 6th most yards to quarterbacks. So higher or lower than 299 for Herbert?
Okay, so I have 290, which is lower. So go with that. Thank you. 290, 2 touchdowns, and 22 rush yards. That's almost 22 fantasy points. So I'm not saying that he's not going to have an awesome game. I'm not saying that he's not going to pass for a lot of yards, because 290 is a lot of yards. The Jets are allowing 288.6, so that is also less than 299. So for me, realistically in this one, it's going to be a slower game, get things back on track so that Herbert can see the field. This is about his growth, not about him trying to crush for your fantasy team only.
Especially if he doesn't have a pass rush in his face like he did all day against the Dolphins. Next up, Mike Evans against the Rams, a touchdown in 7 of 10 games this year, while the Rams have allowed just 4 receiving touchdowns all season, so higher or lower than 1 receiving touchdown for Mike Evans.
Jordan, please draw me a star. This is so, it makes me so, great one. I love it. I love the star. That's my favorite. Mike Evans, we saw last week something I think we're going to continue to see. A nice relationship building between Tom Brady, who was in that scary video earlier in the show, and Mike Evans in the red zone. I think with Antonio Brown on the field, that draws away some coverage, which means Mike Evans, who's the biggest option, he is going to be the best option in terms of scoring a touchdown. He'll go away from Jalen Ramsey, and it will be not in Ramsey's coverage where Evans will have his touchdown.
All right, we'll end it with the Thursday night matchup. DeAndre Hopkins against the Seahawks. D-Hop had 103 yards against Seattle in Week 7, and the Hawks have allowed the most yards per game to wideouts all year long. So higher or lower than $101 for Nuke?
This one's a lower. Not a lot lower. It's 99 yards with 7 receptions and a touchdown. So still 23 fantasy points about. The difference here is that there are going to be some interesting folds that we see in this one. The Seahawks, they need to get a win. This is going to be very important. So look for some Christian Kirk action, maybe even some Andy Isabella vulturing some of those yards. The difference here in this one is they're going to have to account for Hopkins specifically. So 99 yards, a measly 99 yards.
Oh, that's it? Just 99, no big deal.
Hey, I was able to take some time this summer and watch Parks and Recreation for the first time, and I got to admit to you, it was a delightful series. My favorite character was Andy Dwyer. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but he started off as kind of a bit player, but then became a central part of the show. So in honor of Andy Dwyer, here are 5 players who started the season as understudies, but are now starring on your fantasy football team. And at number 5, it's Travis Fulgham. And I understand we might want to rethink this in a couple of weeks now that Jalen Reagor has returned and got a larger role last week. But this is an opportunity for Travis to prove himself against the Cleveland Browns. He's had at least 12 fantasy points in 5 of 6 games this season. Cleveland has allowed 4 top 20 fantasy wide receivers in the last 4 games combined. So this is a huge opportunity for the Eagles to get back on track. At number 4, I have T. Higgins. He was one of my favorite receivers coming into the draft. You can go look at my mock draft. I had it. I'm not lying. And when you look at all the big-name rookies out there who are drafted in front of him, I dare you to find one who's played better than Mr. T. He's currently the wide receiver 14. He's averaged nearly 19 fantasy points. He has at least 10 points in 7 consecutive games and 8 targets in 4 out of his last 5. At number 3, I'm going to go with Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Now I'm going to do a duo, kind of like when Adam Scott and Rob Lowe joined Parks and Rec, and it made it so much better. These guys have really brought something to the Steelers offense. Chase has scored 18.5 fantasy points per game since week 5, which would make him the wide receiver 6 over that time period. Deontay Johnson has at least 10 targets in each of the 5 games he's played fully this year. Both of these guys are amazing. They form a great trio with Juju Smith-Schuster. At number 2, I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift. And this one took a little bit of time. And I'm sure there's an Adrian Peterson 30-carry game looming at some point, but Swift has been amazing. He had 73% of the snaps, 21 touches, 149 total yards against the football team in Week 10. Now he's got the Carolina Panthers, who've allowed a top 25 running back in every game this season. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs on the year, so we love him this week. And at number 1, let's talk about Justin Herbert, a guy we kind of take for granted that he's a rookie. And he was only inserted into the lineup because of a freak injury just prior to their Week 2 game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now he's averaging close to 24 fantasy points per game. He's averaging close to 300 passing yards per game. He's got at least 20 fantasy points in 7 of his last 8 games. And now he's got the Jets, who've allowed the 4th most passing yards per game to quarterbacks this season. So those are my 5 guys. Tua Tagovailoa might make it. Justin Jefferson, Cynthia, would have made this list if his offense was a little bit more consistent. But those are my 5 cameos who turned into superstars. Marcus?
All right, it is Week 11 flex time. It's the time of year where every win is magnified and every starting decision is critical. So, Kimmy, when you make your prediction, no pressure. No pressure.
Okay, no pressure. I'm flexing with Emmanuel Sanders this week because of that amazing matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, with Michael Thomas struggling as of late and the Saints spreading the ball more than ever, Sanders, who is available in 42% of NFL.com leagues, could be a smart flex play. He's had 13-plus fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games and will be playing with Jameis Winston under center, who did lead the league last season with passing yards. So get him in that flex spot.
I'm going to go with Duke Johnson, who had 14 touches versus the Browns in Week 10. Didn't quite translate into the RB1 that we wanted him to be. But you know what? He's getting the opportunity. Nobody is there fighting him for touches in that backfield. And he's got the New England Patriots, who've allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs since Week 7.
Looking at Christian Kirk, and I know last week wasn't great, but he's had a pretty safe double-digit floor for most of the season. Had a couple of touchdowns against the Seahawks back in Week 7. And look, Seahawks, 10 different wide receivers have gone for 100 yards against this secondary, and I do think Kyler Murray is going to find a way to get Christian Kirk a little bit more involved on Thursday night.
Murray back to throw, slips a tackle, got to launch it. Jump ball, and it is. Is it caught? Is it caught? Oh my goodness, it's caught! DeAndre Hopkins caught it! He caught it for a touchdown with 1 second left! I can't believe it! You've got to be joking me! Hopkins reaches up with 3 defenders around him and pulls it in!
You can't cover Duke! Into the desert sky, baby! And D-Hop brought it down! Touchdown!
So that Hail Murray might be the play of the year so far. And if it helped you get a win this week, then hats off to you. But what about some of those hard-earned points that nobody sees? We honor the grind in another round of amazing fantasy points. Might have helped you take a victory lap.
Jones back, lobs one down the left side, caught by Shepard, leaping over the defender. Deep ball down the right side. It's a 50-50 ball, and it's caught. Tate jumps over the defender.
Boy, the Giants are staying aggressive there. That's great hands.
What a heads-up play by Russell. Flips the ball ahead. Ball is caught by Downs. He takes it out of bounds, far side.
Watson looking. He's scrambling. Hit as he throws downfield. Got a man. Randall Cobb.
Pressure coming. Josh trying to get away from it. He gets the pass away. Caught by Motor Singletary.
Big play on a miraculous throw.
Desperation pass.
With a little of his magic, makes a great move.
Rolls right and throws it. Higgins caught it on the sideline.
Made the great catch there.
I think Higgins got his feet in. Sanders up the middle, leaps over a man. Miles Sanders, he is, in a word, terrific.
Throws it by, but a great catch there. Cole Beasley stretched out and got it.
It was a fantastic one-handed catch.
All right, what do you say? We toast to some fantasy players like the ones we just saw there who gave us reason to celebrate in Week 10. Each of us will raise a glass to some fantasy class on our Tuesday toast. Adam Rank, start us off. Who are you cheersing this week?
Well, you know what? I would like to say a nice word about Josh Jacobs, who a couple of weeks, or last week, I should say, a lot of people had some concerns going into this game against the Denver Broncos. There were even people contemplating leaving him on the bench. But you know what? I remain steadfast. I knew that Josh Jacobs was going to come through, and that's exactly what he did, scoring nearly 30 fantasy points. He even had 4 receptions, which I said he was going to do. So, Josh, thank you for making me look smart, and thanks to you, Derek, for continuing this Raiders offense to look amazing.
Cheers on that one. Kimmy, you are up. Who are you toasting?
All right, I got to give and raise a glass to DeAndre Hopkins. He is officially the NFL's jump man. D-Hop is up to something. Look at that right there. Per Next Gen Stats, that Hail Mary pass from Kyler Murray to DeAndre Hopkins had a 16.9% completion probability. The pass traveled 51.7 air yards and was just the second reception this season with 3 defenders within 2 yards. So, jump man, cheers to you.
Cheers. We should almost make that the NFL logo. That'd be pretty sweet. All right, Cynthia, you have the floor.
Me and my friend Barry here, we have something to say. We'd like to give a cheers to DeAndre Swift because he actually came through as a really great running option, earning first downs, earning chunk yards, hurdling people. This was great if you're a Lions fan, if you're a Swift owner. By the way, Matt Prater, a little shout out to you. I don't have a picture of a famous Detroit kicker because, well, let's face it, but I do love the DeAndre Swift going forward. Raise a glass. Barry and I, we're here for it. Here you go. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers indeed. I am going to toast Willie Snead for making it rain fantasy points in the rain for the Baltimore Ravens. But this is just personal for me because this was a desperation flex start, and it ended up working out. It was his 4th career 2-touchdown game, and weirdly enough, all of his 2-touchdown games have come in November, so you're going to have to wait till next year to try to get another one out of Willie Snead. But I will take it. You know, the fantasy points after the rain are much more beautiful than the fantasy points before the rain. So thank you, Willie Snead, for helping me out in one of my leagues this week. All right, before we go to break, it is time for Riddle Me This. Who has the longest active streak this season with at least 60 receiving yards? One hint. One of us mentioned him in this show. So now you guys have 3.5 minutes
T.
to
Higgins.
phone a friend. Please, no Googling. You're on the honor system. We'll be back with the answer right after this. Time to answer our Riddle Me This question. Before the break, we asked, who has the longest active streak this season with at least 60 receiving yards? Adam Rank, I think you actually nailed this one.
What do you mean, actually? I don't know. I researched this. Why am I getting actually on this? I know this about T. Higgins. I was just talking about him earlier in the show and knew that he had done really well this season. And, you know, and this goes back to the thing that Cynthia was talking about. I don't think that he's necessarily better than Justin Jefferson. I just think he's getting the opportunity more. And I think if Jefferson was in Cincinnati's lineup, he'd be crushing it just like T is.
I mean, it's sort of the reason that A.J. Green is probably droppable on a lot of fantasy rosters because T. Higgins has stepped up and has played that well so far this season.